It's Pittsburgh Postgame once again on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm Matt Gajtka, your host, with special guests from Locked On Penguins, the daily podcast. His name is Hunter Hodies. He joins me once again to talk about the Pens' latest two-game sweep here at home ice. At PPG Paints Arena, they wrap up that home stand with two regulation victories over the New York Islanders. Hunter, the first question I have for you is the Barry Trotz curse broken, at least when it comes to the Penguins playing the Islanders? The last couple of years, it's been rough going. And I'm not saying the Penguins lit up the Isles by any means. Yeah, they scored, 5 goals the other night in a shocking blowout. Tonight, more like what we've seen throughout the season series, though. The Penguins win 6 of them, and they got 4 of them in regulation. But outside of Saturday's game, none of them really were decided before the final several minutes. So it was a struggle, but the Penguins, hey, give them credit. They grinded this one out. They still don't have anywhere near their full lineup, and they get the 2 points. And just as importantly, they give the Islanders 0.
Yeah, absolutely. They've solved it, I think, at least for now, going 6-2 against the Islanders, who I think they only have 10 regulation losses overall. The Penguins have 4 of them to the Penguins. Yeah. I was talking about this on my podcast today, and then, of course, I was texting you about it. Something seems different with how they play these very defensively minded teams. I think over these last couple of years, they were pretty humbled, of course, by Barry Trotz and then Claude Julien's Montreal Canadiens, and they had to change something up. And you saw in that third period especially, they out-Islandered the Islanders. Outside of that 90-second shift, right around, what was it, the 3.5-minute mark, 3 minutes remaining in the third period, the Islanders really didn't get anything going, I would say, in that third period. The Penguins were doing a masterful job of clogging up the neutral zone. Even in that final 2 minutes when the Islanders pulled their goalie, they didn't really get anything to DeSmith. I know they had a last gasp chance, I think, with like 7 seconds left, and then there was an icing. But the Penguins did a very good job protecting that lead, especially late. I think I was listening to Dominic Moore, who was calling the game on NBC. He did a really good job, honestly. And he said, the Penguins are just going to be pretty content by allowing the Islanders to pass the puck along the perimeter and play catch and not generate anything in the high danger to medium danger areas. And that's what the Penguins were doing. Well, that's what the Islanders were doing to the Penguins that entire third period, because the Penguins weren't giving them anything. So after that rough second period, it was great to see them close that out. I know it was probably a bit boring to some fans. I get it. It's not the run and gun Penguins that people are used to seeing, but against a team like the Islanders, who are just very obviously defensively minded, and it doesn't take a lot to get them to score. That was a masterful job.
Well, when it comes to these games against the Islanders, I think, Hunter, it's almost the case where if the Penguins are shorthanded like they are right now, perhaps they're more easily convinced to play this way. You look at that third period, all told, there were just 21 shot attempts total between the two teams. The Penguins had 9, the Islanders had 12. That's a far cry from the 35, for instance, that happened in the second period. The Islanders pushed hard. They got the power play goal from Matt Martin. Casey DeSmith, Brian Dumoulin both made some key saves in that second. And DeSmith entering the game in relief between the first and second periods. We don't know the extent of Tristan Jarry's injury. We're assuming it's an injury. I guess it could be an illness too. You never quite know. But at any rate, Jarry started and DeSmith certainly finished it. And the Penguins continue to show off their impressive goaltending depth. But yeah, I'm left taking away what you took away from that third period, where the Penguins didn't give the Islanders much of anything. According to Natural Stat Trick, just 2 high danger chances for the Islanders in the entirety of that third period. Compare that to 10 that they had in the second period. So could have gotten out of hand for the Penguins, in fact, but they survived the middle stanza, and the third was just them committing to a defensive game and not taking much risk at all. And like you said, if you're a neutral fan, maybe that wasn't the most exciting thing to watch in the world. But for me, it feels like significant progress. Now, if they get Malkin and Kapanen back and they still pull this off, I think that's a different step to take, because then perhaps they're tempted to try to push the pace a little bit more. But in this situation, perhaps they're boxed into a corner. And maybe in a lot of cases, that type of desperation that comes from not being anywhere near full strength can actually help them against a team like the Islanders, not trying to do too much. And when you get that early lead, it seems extremely critical against the Islanders to do that, because they play so differently when they have the lead, don't they?
Yeah, they trap it down to a high degree when they get Italy. But when they're trailing, they open up the game a little bit, and that's exactly what they did. The Penguins got that early goal, but even with the second one, just a few minutes later, the game opened up, and then even they almost had a third one. People forget Sidney Crosby hit, I think, the crossbar. Just what was it, 45 seconds to a full minute later. So look, it wasn't a 3-goal deficit. Overall for the game, even with that second period, if you look at 5v5 on StatTrick, Islanders had the high danger chances, but if you look at the Corsi percentage for Pittsburgh, 51.3%. At 5v5, all situations, it's more 50-50. But I still think the Penguins were the better team in 40 minutes of the 60-minute effort. And I agree with your point as well. When they're banged up, the Penguins, of course, that is, they seem to play better defensively than when everyone comes back. I've always never really understood it, but even before these guys got hurt, they still were playing well defensively, but not as well as they are playing right now. And I think it's just because, like you said, they have to simplify their game a little bit, and that's exactly what you saw tonight. And I also tweeted this out. Remember these 2 points. The Penguins are in obviously very high contention to get home ice in the playoffs, which I know it's not going to be full capacity, but that's still a big deal with how the Penguins are 16-3-1 at PPG Paints Arena this year. If I recall, that is tops league wide. They just do not lose at home very often. So remember those 2 points towards the end of the season.
The Penguins are done with the season series against the Islanders, and you talk about remembering those 2 points, and I keep thinking about, okay, what's this going to mean at the end of the season? Regulation wins clearly more important than ever in a season like this when every game is against a divisional opponent. So clearly what the Penguins did this week against the Isles to cap off this homestand is critical, but at the same time, even if the Penguins finish first in the East Division, and right now, by the way, they have the tiebreaker edge on the Islanders for second. They both have 48 points in 36 games. The Capitals have 50 and 34, so the Caps have a couple of edges there. But even if the Pens finish first and they play the fourth place team in the East, it's not like it's going to be some pushover here where there's a clear-cut favorite. So this just feels like another game in an endless series here. It seems between the Penguins and the Caps, the Bruins, the Islanders, maybe even the Flyers. We'll see if they're able to get off their wobble and get back on track here. But boy, it's just one brick in the wall, isn't it? When you're trying to build this thing and try to get out of the division once the playoffs come around. Not to get too far ahead of myself, but with the Flyers falling back, the Penguins are up near 90% probable to make the playoffs. So we can start thinking about that sort of thing. And when you look at this season series against the Isles, 6 wins overall for the Pens, 4 in regulation. The Islanders pick up 2 wins and then 2 overtime points in addition to that. So closer than it might appear than the 6-2 mark, that if you're looking at it from the Pens perspective, that's what it ends up being. But you and I were texting back and forth during the game. It's not like I felt like last year, the last couple of years, I really would have feared this matchup, but the Penguins are playing with more cohesion in some of these tight moments. And just look at this third period tonight where they were able to execute everything they wanted to do, basically, defensively, in a huge spot. The Isles were motivated. They didn't want to lose this game. They never want to lose, obviously, but this one even more so after getting boat raced the other night. So if you had to pick between the Pens and the Isles in a head-to-head playoff matchup, I'd have a hard time picking against the Penguins right now based on what we've seen in this season series.
Yeah, if you were to ask, if these two teams, say the playoffs would start next week or something, I'd probably pick the Penguins in 6-7 games. I'd probably lead them in 7 just because of how well they've played them this year. Like you said, it's a far cry from 2 years ago where they got humbled, embarrassed, whatever other word you want to call it, in those 4 games. And, maybe Mike Sullivan made some adjustments with his system to outcoach Barry Trotz, because for those last couple of years, you go back to 2018 as well, Barry Trotz had his number there too. Of course, the Penguins were also really gassed after 2 consecutive Cup wins, but that was 2 straight series wins for Barry Trotz over Mike Sullivan when Sullivan beat him 2 times in a row in 2016-17. Then you had the struggles in 28. Then you have the struggles last season against the Islanders. I think coming into this year, I read a stat, they had like 1 regulation win in their last 6-7 games against the Islanders. It was a big struggle against, I think the stat was like 0-5-1 or 1-5-1, something like that. But this year, 6-2, like I said, that is a far cry. And they're much more comfortable playing them. And I think if from an Islanders fan perspective, if you talk to them, they probably don't even want anything to do with the Penguins in the playoffs with how well they played against teams like Boston. They destroyed Washington in the playoffs during the return to play. They match up well with basically everyone in this division, but I think Pittsburgh, if these two teams would play, fully healthy, even if you bring Anders Lee back into the fold, who of course is out for the year, I would be hard pressed not to take Pittsburgh, and then especially with how the goalies are going right now. And hopefully we get an update on Tristan Jarry in the next couple of minutes. I haven't seen anything on Twitter. Of course, he left the game after the first period, and hopefully it's not an injury, or it's hopefully not COVID related too. I saw people poking that around.
Always got to throw that into the mix in a year like this one. You can't rule it out, at least for right now. So, Hunter, the Penguins finish up the month of March with this game tonight. They'll open April in Boston, a place where they've had a heck of a time getting even points, let alone victories in recent years. So they'll play on April Fool's Day on Thursday, and then Saturday, 1 p.m. matinee to wrap up that. So the tests are coming once again, but they passed two big ones here against the Islanders. And just in general, the month of March, talk about jam-packed in terms of games here. The Penguins came into the month having played 20 games, and they exited with 35. So they played 15 games in the month of March. Basically every other day they played, and they won 12 of those 15. They went 12, 3-2. So we talk about the March of the Penguins cliche over and over again. What's it been, like 15 years since that movie came out? I feel like every year, though, they find a way to excel in that month. And they do it again here, even though March isn't quite as close to the end of the regular season as it usually is. And you and I have talked a couple of times. We talked most recently after they beat the Flyers 2-1 in that 3-game set early in the month. So that's right when they were starting to get things really rolling. They won 6 in a row. They lost a couple in a row, but in recent times now, they have points in 6 straight, including that overtime loss to the Devils. So they are now 5-0-1 in their last 6. And I know Malkin's not here, but we're starting to see the gradual return to health. And that's what I want to talk about next. You saw Jared McCann and his impact again tonight, scoring in the 4-on-4. And Jason Zucker returns, has a great chance to score. Story of his season, he doesn't bury it, but we're starting to see some more firepower return to this lineup. And I think you leave that first line intact, I would wager, if you're Mike Sullivan, Hunter. But what do you think about as these pieces come back gradually? Kapanen, perhaps shortly, I guess we'll see. Where do you stash these guys as far as the line chart is concerned?
It's a good question. So absolutely leave the top line together. I don't see them breaking that up. When everyone comes back, I'd go that McCann, Malkin, Kapanen line when all three of them were just rolling on all cylinders. I mean, you touched on Jared McCann just now. That's now 8 goals, I think, on the season from him. He looks like a completely different player this year compared to last year. But also in those last 25 games last year, I understand he struggled, but his shooting percentage, if I'm not mistaken, was around 3.4%. In those 25 games. A lot of it was just bad luck and just rotating through line mates. But, with Malkin and Kapanen on his line, he's going to get fed plenty of chances game in and game out. I would do that. Obviously, you leave the Aston Reese, Blueger, Tanev line together. That's one of my opinion, if it's a fourth line, it's one of the 5 best fourth lines in hockey. Islanders fans like to say that the Martins Clutterbuck line is the best. With all due respect, I would take the Aston Reese Blueger line over them. And then for that other line, there's a lot of options. Obviously, you're going to have Jason Zucker on there on that left wing. I would have Evan Rodriguez on the right. And then maybe in a trade, you bring in another center and put a center there. There's all this talk, I think, from Ron Hextall and Brian Burke. They want to bring in someone bigger, that can be a bit physical. I don't mind that as long as the player can actually play. The problem with that is, though, Calgary's not going to give you Matthew Tkachuk for peanuts. You're not going to get another mini Tom Wilson coming in here, or a lesser Evander Kane, something like that. So there's just a lot of the players that they want, like a player like that. They have, 1, long-term contracts, and 2, they're not available. They're not for sale. So they're going to have to be. It's going to be curious to see what they do. A player I keep coming back to. Hasn't played center a lot for his career. Anthony Mantha from Detroit. I don't know what the price is to pry him out of there, but I'm sure Steve Yzerman is going to be listening on basically, I think, anyone for the season, just because of how bad the Red Wings are. I mean, they are just a tough watch. But that's what I think I would do personally. Get Jankowski out of the lineup. He just I have a nightly Jankowski tweet basically at this point. Colton Sevier doesn't really do anything for me. And then as your 13 forward, Frederick Goudreau, he needs to be the next man in when this team is fully healthy, and he needs to continue to get games until this team does get healthy.
Gaudreau and Angelo, and I'm glad to see Angelo score again. I think those two guys are players that I want to see continue to get chances as players further up the depth chart return to the lineup. If you do see Kapanen back, we saw Zucker back in the lineup here tonight. You're right about Sevier. You're right about Jankowski. It's just not happening there. We saw O'Connor a couple of nights ago. Sam Lafferty runs hot and cold. He's made some decent plays in recent games. I want to give him some credit, and he was actually above water in terms of shot attempts tonight at 5-on-5. So it's not been all bad for Lafferty, but as players come back to the lineup here and knock on wood, no further injuries occur, then you just have that attrition, that natural attrition that helps make the team overall healthier, ironically. So I'm looking forward to that. And I think with Zucker, I think he's even good enough where if you wanted to plug him into a third line situation, that could be a spot where he could flourish. I continue to be high on Jason Zucker. He's a proven NHL scorer, and I know that he has not really shown that since he got here to Pittsburgh, but I love his feet are still there. He can still move. He can still think the game really well, and he's going through what Jared McCann went through last year at this time, as you just alluded to, a rough stretch of finishing, and I think that turns around if he continues to stick to that process. I thought it was really interesting. Our friend Danny Irving, Shirey Irving on Twitter, shared the Penguins' primary points producers. And if you're wondering what that means, it's goals and primary assists, first assists, because those tend to be more repeatable than secondary assists. That's why we look at primary more than secondary when really breaking down production. But primary points per 60 minutes this season, Jared McCann actually leads the Penguins. Now in a limited sample because he's been out due to injury for a while. He's missed some time this year, but he's ahead of even Sidney Crosby. And again, he gets a goal here tonight at even strength. So I think he's more important than maybe even I gave him credit for coming into the season. So good to see him back and productive, even without Malkin. That would seem to be the boost for him initially, but he's even doing it without him. Kudos to McCann and Zucker back there too as well. I also want to give a tip of the cap. I mentioned Brian Dumoulin making some desperate plays. John Marino is starting to chime in on the score sheet over and over again. He makes the pass for the McCann goal here tonight. And I'm not sure there's a more significant development on the defensive side of things, Hunter, than him finding his game. And he came into the night, in fact, as the Penguins' best play driver from the back end. I know he's not facing the competition of Dumoulin or Letang, but compared to the start of the season, he was like the team in January, very stagnant and looking out of sorts. When a player like him, a middle pairing type of guy, is playing at a high level like he is, then there's no surprise the Penguins have risen up the standings like they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's almost like you take him away from Mike Matheson, you put him with Marcus Pettersson, voila, things are going to get better. I think that pairing was doomed to fail from the start because both of those players are offensively minded players, right? They both want the puck on their stick at all times, especially Mike Matheson. I mean, we all know how bad defensively he's been in his own zone. Plenty of times I could bring up too many highlights to count of him just, not playing as well in the defensive zone as someone like John Marino. But you put him with Marcus Pettersson. I mean, Pettersson's a more defensive defenseman than Marino, and you let Marino handle the puck. You see the dividends that's paying right now. And, yeah, I mean, he's definitely lighting up the score sheet. I mean, I think just a couple of games ago, he got his first goal of the season. And just a couple of weeks ago, I think I read an article from Adam Gretz. I think Marino had 4 points in the season's first 20, 25 games. But ever since, he's come back and played with Pettersson, he's been putting up a lot more points. His defensive metrics have improved greatly. In that article, actually, his defensive metrics with Pettersson this season look just like they did last season with him. But if you put him with Matheson, it looks so different just because they're always swimming in the defensive zone. So I think that's the number one thing is just getting him back with his reliable, steady partner. And then, they're facing, obviously, like you said, they're not facing that top line talent that Dumoulin and Letang are. They're going to take care of that. But going up against the second and third lines and producing these kind of underlying numbers that they have so far this season, I think the possession is well above 50%. Scoring chances against are way lower than compared with Matheson. it's paying huge dividends.
So often it's about finding that right mix, and I think defense pairings are just as evident of that fact than the forward trios, which we tend to focus on. We talk chemistry in hockey, and a lot of times it's about, well, which duos or which trios tend to work best together up front. Let's not forget about defense. Let's not forget about the fact that you need some complementary talents back there. And let's not forget that in this modern NHL, who's playing on the blue line is almost just as critical to your offense as who's playing up front. And that's pretty evidenced by someone like John Marino, who has shown some upside. And I was kind of down on his offensive production earlier this year, as you mentioned, not a lot there. And I was wondering, well, maybe the Oilers had it right in their evaluation of him. Maybe there wasn't much there, and perhaps last year was a nice blip on the radar for the Penguins. But maybe he was going to settle into something a little bit lower than that, just in terms of offensive creation. But it might not be the case. I think we're seeing the sample size play out that he's starting to repeat a lot of the successes that he had last year. I don't want to leave the folks hanging. We have some comments here tonight. Remember, on YouTube, you can comment. Also on Twitter, also on Facebook. It's streaming at Matt Gajtka Media tonight. So it all shows up here on the screen on Restream. So we've engaged the chat display function. Underwater Levels says, really nice game from the Pens. Got the job done against the tough Isles. Walt Flanagan says, beating a good team or good teams, as the Penguins have done, in both tight games and high-octane games is honestly a bigger deal than some may give them credit for. Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Walt. I feel that they're proving something here. The Islanders are not going to open things up ever under Barry Trotz. They pack it in. They play, I think, surprisingly well in transition. They're not necessarily a slow team or anything like that. And with a guy like Matt Barzal and a player like Jordan Eberle, a complimentary guy, even without Anders Lee, they're still plenty potent. But they're potent in a different way. They're not necessarily in the high event hockey game as the Penguins might prefer. Matt Popchak adds in, he had a couple of things to say. First, on YouTube, no team has rained on playoff parades here quite like the Islanders. Being able to take 6 of 8 from these guys feels more significant than a regular season series normally would. Yeah, shadows of 1993, I'm sure, for those Penguins fans of a certain age. Also going back to the early 80s, the Pens blew a 2-0 lead against the Islanders. They haven't had a lot of success against New York in the playoffs, so hopefully this can be a harbinger of good things if they do meet in the postseason. Here's one thing from David Gormley, though, that I do want to touch on with you, Hunter. No Jari equals big problems. Let's hope. I don't know if I agree that it's big problems just because of how well DeSmith has played, but I think also the Penguins' goaltending is greater than the sum of its parts right now because they have the ability to play either of those two guys and not feel like there's going to be a significant letdown. And both of those guys can be free to play and not worry about, well, if I go into a run of bad form or if I get hurt, then the team's screwed. So when both guys are going, it boosts that level a little bit extra, both for the team and also for the goaltending tandem. That's at least how I feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think then the last 7 appearances that Casey DeSmith has made, his save percentage is .930 or better. This is the best hockey we've seen from DeSmith throughout his NHL career. He is definitely not the goalie that we saw a couple seasons ago where he was struggling very hard to make a save. He's just been a completely different goalie. Looks like there was an update on Jari after the game for everyone. It is an injury. Apparently the medical staff thought it was good to take him out. But DeSmith also said after the game he doesn't think it's too serious. Sullivan's not going to say anything, though, just because he's so coy about it. He just doesn't really say anything about injuries. But hopefully it's nothing too serious. But I mean, they should be okay if it's just a couple of games because Casey DeSmith has been so good this season. I think I saw a tweet from Jay Fresh Hockey this morning. Please go follow him on Hockey Twitter. He does great stuff. I think Casey DeSmith overall for like the last month or something is top 10 in goals saved above expected. Something like that.
I was just going to cite that. Yeah, I was going to moneypuck.com. He is, in fact, overall in the season, he has 7.5 goals saved above expected, which is 4th in the entire league. And that's from a backup position too.
Yeah, he has been ridiculously good. And, I assume he'll get the start on Thursday, but we'll see how banged up Jari is. I'm sure the team is going to practice tomorrow. We'll see if he's at practice, but if they need to be without Jari for just a couple games, it's not the end of the world. Hopefully it's nothing like week to week or anything. You know, it almost seems like the Penguins injury situation this year. I go back to, you know, Avengers Infinity War, for those who watched that, a soul for a soul kind of thing. You know, I think Chad from Penguins Twitter had that basically for that tweet. It was just like one person comes in, one comes out. I just don't understand it.
I'm actually surprised that Tristan Jarry's numbers in terms of both save percentage above expected and wins above replacement, he's still trying to dig out from that early season hole. He's not where he was at the start of the year, where it was he and Matt Murray and Marcus Hogberg, also from the Ottawa Senators, were vying for the worst spot in the league. But he's still below average. So, you know, Jarry still has some ways to go. But DeSmith, honestly, has been pretty solid all the way through. He maybe had one or two rough games, but outside of that, I think the Pens are in good hands, at least for the short term. But you know, David, I am still concerned long term. Obviously, if it's just Casey DeSmith, then it's a guy who hasn't done it in the playoffs at all. Has no experience in the postseason at the NHL level, at least. So he still has that one hurdle to climb. If it does come down to that, of course, we still have several weeks to go before the playoffs. They don't start until the second weekend of May this time around. It would be wrong of us, Hunter, to ignore the other news in the NHL. The Buffalo Sabres have now matched the Penguins' record from 2003-04 of 18 consecutive games without a victory. They blow a 3-0 lead against the struggling Flyers, and they lose in overtime. They got a point, yay! But can you believe it? The Flyers were scrambling. Carter Hart is basically benched right now for them. They're searching for answers. And I guess they got the answer in the form of a huge comeback win up in Buffalo. I just feel terrible for the Sabres at this point because I don't know how you come back from that. You look like you're on the verge of breaking out of this long streak without a win, and you squander a 3-0 lead against a team that's playing basically just as bad as you are right now. So it doesn't get much worse for the Sabres at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. They came into the third period, for the Sabres, having that 3-goal lead. It's like, wow, they're finally going to do it. Then it's a 1-goal lead with less than 2 minutes left. It's like, can you just hold on for 2 minutes here? Of course,
nope, they can't.
They tie the game, and then they go on to win. And it's just like, you know, I have a couple best friends from college who are Sabres fans. I feel so bad for them and everyone in that fan base, just because I had so many of my favorite players growing up played for Buffalo, like Dominic Hasek, Pat LaFontaine, Alexander Malgny, of course. I mean, but even, you know, in my childhood, prime Thomas Vanek, a prime Jason Pominville, they were fun to watch. I know they weren't those top 10 players that, you know, obviously Pittsburgh and other teams have had, but they were fun. And the people of Western New York deserve so much better than this garbage that they're getting right now. And, you know, there's also rumors that they might hire Jim Rutherford as president of hockey operations. So if they want to do that, that would be fun. And, you know, they're obviously going to have a fire sale as the trade deadline comes closer. We're 2 weeks away now, for those that do not remember. They already traded Eric Stahl. That was one of my targets. But they still have Taylor Hall out there. They may not even get a first-round pick for him. Imagine saying that in 2021 when this started. So, yeah, just I feel bad for them. And then for the Flyers, you know, they get that big win. But honestly, Matt, I feel like it might be it's close to too little, too late for them to at least catch the top 3 teams in this division. I think they have a shot to catch Boston, but Boston has a lot, I think, of Buffalo down the stretch, and I think they're going to start playing better soon.
Yeah, it's difficult to really project things without looking at, okay, how many times do they play the Sabres at the end of the season? How many times do they play? Oh, we saw the Devils are better than the Sabres, demonstrably. By the way, the Penguins still have 4 left, 2 at Buffalo and 2 at home against Buffalo. The last 2 games of the regular season, May 6th and 8th, in case they need that last second boost for seeding purposes, they will have the the blue and gold once again coming into town here. So anything else you'd like to touch on here, Hunter? Another power play goal for the Penguins. I believe they've scored now in several in a row. They're still hovering around 20th in terms of raw conversion rate, but the shot attempt numbers are picking up. The underlying numbers are picking up, and they're starting to get those goals to go in. Angelo, perhaps a little bit fortunate with the deflection or with the chance in front of the net, and it was a second unit power play goal, which of course is different from seeing the first unit connect. But we're seeing Crosby float all around. Last time we chatted, they had just moved Sid to the left side on the power play. Now it feels like you don't know where he's going to pop up. So I like that. And I think much like the Penguins when they don't have Malkin and or Crosby in the lineup, they're forced to play simpler. When they just have Sid or just have Malkin on the power play, that also simplifies things. I hate to say that the power play is better without one of the top two centers, but I think it actually is because they're just more direct and they have a better idea of where they want to go with it. What do you think about that?
The conversion rate would tell you that they are, considering I think they have 5 power play goals in the last 3 games, all without Malkin. It is kind of funny, especially when one of their 2-star players goes out, or even Chris Letang, power play just magically improves. And even tonight, you said it best, they got pretty fortunate with that power play goal because it looked bad for the first 70, 80 seconds. And then Marino has that awesome pass, basically throws it to the front of the net, and Angelo gets that sweet but kind of lucky deflection. It's like, well, I guess that's that when your power play is clicking, that stuff happens. So there's obviously still room for improvement. You don't want to be 20th in the league with all that firepower. Going to the other side, Matt, the PK I think has killed off 20 of the last 21 penalties. So improvement, is all happening without their 2 best penalty killers. So I think both special teams have benefited from some of their best players being out of the lineup. So I guess that's just hockey for you. And I guess to close this out, like you said, I think in the month of March, that was the time for the Penguins to make their move. You said their record was 12. I think it was 12-3-2, 12-3-1, something like that. They had 12 of those 16 games at home. And that is why they are now in second place in the East Division. They banked all those points at home. They even did well on the road. And so now even the month of April is still pretty soft. After they get the Bruins for these next couple of games, and for those that are unaware, Penguins have not won a game in Boston since 2014. So we'll see if they can finally break that. They play a lot. They play the Rangers coming up for the last couple of times. They have 5 games against the Devils this month. I know the Devils have had the Penguins number, but I think in those 3 games, the Penguins were kind of gassed because they played 5 games in 7 nights. Mm-hmm. They still have Buffalo this month. They have a game against Philadelphia. And then I think towards the late end, they finally play Washington going into May. So the Penguins can bank a lot of points as the month turns to April, even though a lot of their games are going to be on the road just because they had 12 of 16 at home in the month of March. But still, I'd say their playoff chances right now are at 90-95%, and hopefully some more reinforcements keep coming back.
After that scintillating month of March, the Penguins' chances of winning the division are better than they are of missing the playoffs, certainly. So time to adjust our sights upward, I think. But just as I say that, they will play 8 of their next 9 on the road. 2 at Boston, 2 at New York, 2 at New Jersey, 1 home against Philly, a postponed game from earlier, and then 2 at Buffalo. So the first 3 weeks of April will be spent almost exclusively on the road. But then again, this year, the travel is so much easier. You're spending multiple nights in the same city, and the flights in the East Division are, all less than an hour, I think. Maybe Boston's a little bit more than an hour. Those who are frequent commuters might be able to correct me. I've made that flight a couple of times. I can't recall how long it is, but it's not very long. You go up and you come down. So that all plays in their favor. And at the start of the season, Hunter, and I'll leave it with this, and you can fire back if you like, but I thought the Penguins were going to be at an advantage based on just how the schedule is working out with all these teams close by geographically, also the travel being simplified with these 2-game series. I think it benefits a team like the Penguins, which has older star players especially. So maybe I'm being proven prescient at this moment. Still a long way to go in the regular season, but that's how I felt. And it took them a little while to get going, but they are certainly marching now, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said at the beginning of this, the March of the Penguins was in full swing for this month. I go back just to, 2013, something like that. They won 15 in a row during the month. That was when the real March of the Penguins, when people started saying that. But of course, you mentioned.
You got to say it. We'll say it one more time.
Yeah, you mentioned the March with it. So, but yeah, I mean, I had them at second going into this season. I really thought outside of almost every team in this division, they were only worse than the Bruins. Obviously, the Bruins have been hit hard, not just by injuries, but by COVID, just because they have had a lot of players on the COVID list this year. And I think the Bruins right now, if I check the standings right, they have 5-6 games in hand on the Penguins, even though the Penguins are 8-9 points up. So it's going to get closer. They're going to win, I would say, most of those games. They still have a lot against Buffalo left. People like to harp on the Penguins struggling against New Jersey. The Bruins are 0-4-1. I think they're 1-4 against New Jersey this year. So,
wow. Yeah,
it's pretty pathetic. So, but this is another big month coming up, and like I said, Matt, this is the perfect time to be getting back players. You're playing a lot of the teams that are in the bottom 4 of the standings right now, and if you want to make a run at winning the East Division and getting some guys back, this is the time to do it, even though a lot of the games are on the road.
If the Penguins want to finish in the top 2 and get a home series in that first round, they can't lose both of these at Boston. I'll put it that way. I feel confident saying that much. So significant series for seeding and for playoff positioning. Like you mentioned, the Bruins still have a ton of games in hand on them and the other teams in the division. And the Penguins still trail the Caps, and the Caps have games in hand too. And they are 2 points up on the Penguins still. The Capitals have caught fire as well. And the Pens are going to see them for a while. So no real chance to peck at that lead directly. They'll have to continue to pick off some of these other teams and other points in different ways, not the head-to-head matchup. One last word from the comments from Facebook. Jared Wickerham, my former colleague and good friend, says all the Pagula money up in Buffalo is going to their daughter Jessica's tennis career. Yeah, Hunter, you're a tennis fan. You know that Jessica Pagula is one of the rising stars, in fact, in U.S. tennis. So at least they've got that going for them. They got the Buffalo Bills back in the playoffs, and they've got Jessica playing well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, she's going to be really good in the foreseeable future. I'm really excited to see how well she starts playing in the majors. And, I guess we'll leave it with tennis. Hopefully King Roger makes a return here again sooner rather than later.
Tennis talk to wrap it up. Hey, and the Pens will be playing some back and forth with the Bruins here, I'm sure. Looking forward to some good games there, some good rallies, if you will, between the Pens and the Bees Thursday and Saturday. Keep it right here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Like and subscribe and sign up for the notifications so you know when we go live. For Hunter Hodies of Locked On Penguins, check out that daily podcast 5 days a week at LO_Penguins on Twitter. You see Hunter's name there under his face smiling at you right now. That's where you can find him on Twitter. Same deal for me at Matt Gajtka, Twitter and Facebook. Thanks again for watching. We'll talk to you next time on Pittsburgh Post.